Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Relationship with podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Snow. I'm a business strategist and also a business relationship consultant for female entrepreneurs on a mission to make networking less weird and more fun and effective. Like, why are we doing it if it's not working? I personally don't love networking, quote unquote, in the traditional sense of the word, which is a big reason I started my company because I want to change the way that we are doing it. And I want to make it better for everyone, especially women like me who don't fit the mold of what everybody thinks a professional, successful female entrepreneur is supposed to look like. That ain't me, sister. But I am still crushing it. And so are you. So let's just keep crushing it. All right. Today, speaking of crushing it, I am interviewing Lori Kennedy. She is incredible. She is the founder and CEO of the Wellness Business Hub. And we are talking about your relationship with making your first 100K. If you know me, if you've followed me for a while, you know I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this whole $100,000 a year is the mecca, and that's how you know you've succeeded, and that's when you know that you've made it and you won't fail, and everything is amazing at 100K. I don't subscribe to that generally, and I think it's a very flawed calculation in many ways. If you are a realtor and you sell multi-million-dollar homes, your 100K year is going to be very different than someone who sells $100 products, right? That's going to take something very different to get to 100K. The other thing we don't talk about a lot when we're talking about your 100K year is that your profit or is that your income? Because I know a lot of women that are making 100K, more than 100K, and they're still broke. And we talk about that in this interview. We talk about all these things in this interview. I love Lori's perspective on making your first 100K, on why it's so hard, and about what changes for you once you get to that 100K mark and what actually doesn't change for you. It's such an important topic. So Lori is the first and foremost a mom to her 2 kids. She's, as I mentioned, the founder and CEO of the Wellness Business Hub. It is a global business development company for alternative practitioners and coaches who are starting and growing an online business. The Wellness Business Hub's mission is to revolutionize how practitioners and coaches do business so they can have flexibility, freedom, and financial stability while they transform lives for a living. Love Lori so much, and I'm excited for you to hear her interview. So here we go. Hello, Lori. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so excited to chat with you today about making 100K. It's such an interesting topic. We were talking before we started recording about how 100K in a lot of marketing, especially, is like this promised land of like, now you've made it. Now you have no problems.
Right.
Now everything is perfect. So we're going to talk about the reality of making 100K today. So before we dive into that, tell everybody just a little bit about you and what you do and your relationship with making 100K.
So it's an interesting thing what I do. I guess I'm a coach because all of the iterations of my business journey have been in the coaching realm. So I started off as a personal trainer. I became a registered holistic nutritionist. And now I do business coaching for practitioners and coaches who want to make that transition online, who are just getting started in the online space. And we work with them to create an online program and their brand and really sort of their technology and their automations to get them up and running. I've never had a corporate job. So I've been a coach. Actually, even before I was a personal trainer, I was a gymnastics coach when I was like 16. So I've really been in the coaching industry my entire working life.
Yeah.
I've worked for myself. I mean, I've had serving jobs. I've done all of that like in university, but my steady paycheck always came from either being a trainer or my clinical nutrition practice that I had for 7 years. And now I run the Wellness Business Hub, which again, we work with practitioners and coaches from all over the world. And, making that first $100,000, I didn't even realize that it was a thing until somebody else congratulated me because was still broke. Like, like I was like, what's the big deal? Like, I'm still the business mate. So we can talk about the difference between the business making 100,000 and you taking home 100,000, because those are two very different things. When the business makes 100,000, you're kind of still broke.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is interesting about that whole like 100K is the most amazing thing. It's like 100K revenue and 100K profit are very different things.
Very different.
100K is a really different thing depending on who you're talking about, what industry you're in, right?
100%.
If you're a realtor and you only sell multi-million-dollar homes, you're going to sell 2-3 homes and have $100,000 a year, right? If I'm selling a product that costs $17.95,
yes,
me getting to 100K is going to be a very different experience.
100%. Absolutely. And there's so many variables, and I don't want to minimize getting to 100K regardless, because that means you did something.
For sure.
Right? That means you did something. But I think, and we'll obviously get into this, but it is, in my opinion, the hardest milestone to hit. And also, I think people blow it up, and then you get there and perhaps you're disappointed. You're like, I thought everything was supposed to be magical.
Right.
And it's not,
Right. And I still have no money.
I still have no money.
So did you get to that 6-figure mark as a personal trainer or as a holistic
nutritionist? Yep. As a nutritionist. Yep. So I went from selling time for money, as most service providers do. So the way that I was taught was to sell a 60-minute session for a set period of time, and then you charge for every additional follow-up. And that's what I did until, and very quickly, I might add, realized that model of practice, so we call it a practice model, it's really a business model. It's a service provider. It's the same one that hairdressers follow, like it's not just in the coaching industry or the alternative health industry. I realized very quickly, one, because I had a baby, and two, because I was ambitious and I did want to make a lot of money, that the dollars per hour, that like very transactional way of working, wasn't going to work for me. And so in 2009, I created my first signature program. And I was able to put 12 to 15 clients in my group, which was called Wow Weight Loss at the time. And I was able to put them into a group program. I modeled it after Weight Watchers, because in 2009, there weren't, the gurus teaching this stuff. I just realized that I needed to find a better way to work with my clients for their own benefit and their results, and also my life. And so I did that. And I very quickly realized that there was another option and a better way to be able to, number one, get client results. Number two, have a thriving career that didn't destroy my home life and cause me to burn out, and allow me to also grow my practice while keeping my hours pretty stable. Like, with a one-to-one model, if you want to grow, you have to work more.
Right.
And I wasn't interested in that. I wanted to be at home for bath time. I wanted to be at home for bedtime. I didn't want to have to give up those moments. I was like, how do I figure this out? And so really creating that for myself at the time was the way that I was able to get to that first $100,000, because I had one offering that I sold multiple ways.
I think that's important for people to know before we get into the topic, that you did make your first 6 figures as a regular business owner, right? I think sometimes people
not as a business coach. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes people think like the ones who are making money are the ones who are like, oh, I can teach other people how to make money, even though I never did it.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, no. And I think it's really important. And I feel always awkward calling myself a business coach because I don't have any formal business training other than that I've been paying like I've been self-employed since I was 19.
Right.
Right. And like running and growing these things. I don't have an MBA. I failed grade 10 math. I never took an accounting course. I've never done any of those things. So I don't, there's just no other sort of title that works. But I had my nutrition clinic for 7 years full time. That's what I did. I actually closed it in 2016. And I had it running at multiple gyms, and I was licensing out the program to other practitioners. And so for me, what I really got out of that, which I think is really important for people who are ambitious, who want to hit that first major milestone of making six figures, is I think the thing that I wish somebody would have told me was you can do it in a way that doesn't cause harm to your personal life. Because no one explained that to me. And I think for a lot of people, whether you're a graphic designer charging by the hour, whether you are a coach charging by the hour, whatever it is that you're doing, if you're still charging by the hour, then it's going to feel extremely difficult. And more than likely, you're going to end up resenting the growth that you have because it's causing you harm.
Right.
Because you have to work more in order to make more money.
Right.
And so for me, it was so important to me. And it's funny because I never set a goal to make $100,000. It was a fun game almost to be like, okay, how can I rig this system to be able to see more clients? And for me, it was always just more clients. Like, right. I wanted to have a roster in my mind, maybe because I came from, being a health practitioner. It was, you have to have a full client load. Like in my mind, a full client load was 50 clients. Like that's what I was getting to. And if I was trading dollars for hours, I couldn't sustain that. Like, because it's 50 new clients, because they only really come once or twice or three times.
Right.
I can't, like, that's a lot, right? A lot. Versus this group where, first of all, you can charge more. They stay. They've prepaid for the entire time, and you can just add more groups. So, I was running at the time 4 different groups. Each had 12 to 15 clients in them. It was an hour. Each group was an hour once a week. It's 4 hours.
Yeah.
Right. But I was seeing 50 clients.
Yeah.
Right. So it really did change the game. And so that's how I was really able to do it. I had this one program. I had different groups running. And then for those people that wanted to still work with me one-on-one, I was able to then charge a premium, but it was no sweat off my back because they came into the clinic for the program I offered. I just delivered it differently. So it wasn't like I was creating, there was no homework, there was no creation at home, there was no research, there was no nothing. It was like, this is my methodology and I can deliver to you one-on-one 30 minutes, but that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And everybody's still getting what they came for.
100%.
In a different way. It's much easier and less time consuming for you.
Yeah.
So why do you think it's interesting that you say that like you didn't even realize making 6 figures was a thing when you got to that point, and that, that's a whole other rabbit hole of how we get to 6 figures without having any money. That'll be the next episode. Your relationship with making 6 figures and still being broke. But why do you think that 6 figures is this like put on a pedestal? This is the big thing. This is how you know that you've made it.
I think, and I've worked with enough other people to see the pattern as well. In order to make $100,000, it's $8,333.33 a month, which if you're used to charging traditional prices, even for graphic design, it doesn't matter what you do. It's anywhere from $30 to $250 an hour, right? So to go from charging by the hour, something has to give. When you increase pricing, let me rephrase. Your ability to increase your pricing is directly related to your mindset. So the reason that making the first $100,000 is such a big deal is because the level of resistance at that point is so high. You've never done this before. You've never had to build an audience. Like, to get to the 100 grand, even if, I mean, let's assume that your first six figures, which means you're just starting, right? You've never really done this before in this capacity. You're learning as you go. The level of resistance is so high. The self-doubt is so high. You're constantly working outside of your own comfort zone. The first 100 grand you ever make will be more than likely, and I only can speak to the amount of money that I've made. It was the hardest. It was the hardest money I ever made because there was no proof of concept. There was no framework to fall back on. There was no metrics to help me make decisions. You are flying by the seat of your pants, even if you're in a coaching program, even if somebody's mentoring you. And I can say that I mentor lots of people, hundreds of people. I have hundreds of active clients. Like, I can say it'll still be, because it's a framework and you're bumping up against, is this going to work constantly? And so that energy output of, is this going to work? Am I doing the right thing? Even if you're following a framework, even if somebody's literally telling you exactly what to say, there's still this level of, can I really do this? And then you go and you make the first six figures and you're like, oh, validation.
Yeah.
Maybe this does work. Right. And you're like, okay, so you build a little bit of confidence in yourself because you're like, cool, I made six figures. That's a big deal. Everybody tells me that this is a big deal. So it must be a big deal.
Right.
And so the confidence builds. And then you're like, cool, if I can make six, can I double that? And then you make 250 and you're like, mind is blown. Right. And then you make five and you're like wigging out because you're like, holy crap, I just made $500,000. Like, nobody else I know in the whole world has ever made that amount of money. Right. And so it's just like, at every stage, starting with 100 grand, your identity has to shift. Your understanding of money and how it actually works shifts. So it's these massive shifts. That's why I think it's so challenging for the people that don't ever hit that first six figures. It's not because they're not smart enough. It's not because the formula works for some and it doesn't work for others. That's nonsense. It's literally their inability to get past their own beliefs and actually just execute until they hit it, and trial and error until they hit it.
Yeah. It's interesting. My sister and I had a conversation once. We were at a John Mayer concert, and he had, there's a point to this. He had these backup singers, were incredible singers, right? And I actually quite like John Mayer, but John Mayer is not the best singer I've ever heard in my whole life. Like, he's certainly better than me, but he's not like, oh my gosh, I've never heard anyone sing so beautifully in my whole life. And he's okay, but he's also not like the most beautiful man I've ever seen in my whole life, right? So we're having this conversation about, like, what is the difference? How does John Mayer become John Mayer? And these people who are clearly more talented singers than him become backup singers, right? And I don't actually know this. I don't know any backup singers. I don't know John Mayer, but in my made up scenario, it's a lot of what you're talking about, right? It's the difference between the people who can walk into record producer after record producer and say, hey, I want to make an album, and get told no, and continue to go to the next one and the next one and the next one year after year. Play in these shitty coffee shops, go play where no one's listening to them, right? And continue on until they become John Mayer, versus the ones that are like, I've tried this for years. It's not working. I'm just going to go be John Mayer's backup singer. Yep.
Absolutely. 100%. And I think, some people are better off as like a number two. Some people really are better off and can provide their zone of genius as a backup singer.
Yeah.
But the people who end up being backup singers and have regret and resentment, it's, that's who we're talking about. We're talking about like the people who end up making the six figures. And I see this all the time, even in my own program, right? Where there's people that come out of my own program, and every coach has this experience because not 100% of your clients are 100% successful,
Mm-hmm.
who were like, the program didn't work. And I'm like, that's really interesting because we didn't change it for you. So there's a percentage of people, that knocked it out of the park. And then there's a percentage of people that are working the program and getting great results. And then there's a percentage of people who deem themselves and every investment massive failures. How come?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And not to take on responsibility, like off responsibility off my shoulders, but it's interesting. Same thing, right? Where you look at like a class of people, the teacher said the same words, right? They had the same textbooks. How come some people excel and other people don't? Sure, everybody learns differently, yes. But if you take somebody with the exact same environment and whatnot, right? And we see that. So it's like a lot of it comes down to your ability, which again, it's why that first 100 grand is so difficult to get to, is because not everybody is starting off with the same lived experience, the same level of confidence, the same level of self-worth. Some people have to overcome so much more, right? To get to that place. So that's the interesting part.
Yeah.
It's the psychology of that could be a book, actually. The psychology of the first 100 grand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are a lot of different layers to it. I was just interviewing Samantha Siffring, who is a business coach also, and she was talking about being in a coaching program where she looked around and realized like it was all about mindset. It was all about changing your thoughts. That was the sole focus of like, that is how you succeed. And she was saying at one point, she like kind of looked around and realized the people that were in that program that were succeeding were the people who had backgrounds already in marketing. And so that mindset piece was exactly what they needed to go to the next level. And the people who weren't doing as well, who were just trying to like mindset themselves into it,
needed both.
that didn't know anything about marketing, were like, why isn't this working for me? So
yes,
there are a lot of layers to it in terms of like starting point and privilege and expendable income. Like there's a lot to it.
100%. Actually, I was just writing about this morning, and that's so true. I was literally saying that there was 3 things, and it was strategy, and it was literally in this order. It was strategy, it was mindset, and then it was practical application. And I sandwiched mindset in between because you can have you need the strategy. So you can't just have, the vision board and the mindset and all of that fun stuff, right? And the whole like embody it and like have the energy and whatever if you have no strategy. But you need the strategy. And then there's mindset, and then there's practical application, except that the mindset controls whether you actually apply the strategy or not. Right? So like you go and learn the strategy, and I'm like huge on strategy. You go and learn the strategy, but then you have to also work on the mindset, because you can have all the strategy in the world, but if the mindset isn't right, then there's no practical application. Right. In which case it's a lose-lose situation.
Right.
And that's how I would always think about it. And what I've seen and observed even in my own life and in my own business, it's, strategy, get your mindset right, practical application, and then the cycle repeats, right? To get to the next level, there's new strategies, but if the mindset doesn't catch up, there's no execution. Right. So it's ongoing. It's not like, oh, I made 100 grand. I've made it. I've achieved. I'm successful. It's like, you're just starting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we have to recognize too that people's ability to implement the things that they're learning is going to be different depending on their
100%.
various circumstances, right? Like if I'm living off my family's inheritance and money is never a concern for me, I have no
100%.
Children.
Yep.
I have all the time in the world, all the money in the world, right? My ability to actually apply those strategies is going to be very different from someone who has 4 kids. That takes a lot of time, is concerned, doing it on her own, is concerned about, am I going to bring the money in this month to be able to buy the school supplies, right? Like that's also 100%. A very different aspect too.
And I think that's a very strong consideration. I was chatting with a client this morning who's a single mom. And I was saying to her, you're just going to have to surrender to the fact that your timeline is going to be very different than most. You're a single mom. right? So whether you're a single mom or not, to hit that first 100K when you're starting from scratch and you're already bumping up against a level of resistance, and the mental load and the responsibility that you have is far greater than most others, it's going to take you longer because you have actual less time. You have less time and you have less mental bandwidth. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just your reality. So, stay in your lane, keep your head down and don't compare yourself. Have that be the goal, but just have the timeline be realistic. And I think that's also another big thing. It's like, especially with these ads and all this, like, the people that are saying like, oh, I'll help you hit six figures. They're not starting from absolute scratch.
Mm-hmm.
They already have an audience. They already have an offer that converts. That's very different than if you literally have 0 people on your email list. You're not making six figures unless you sell a program for $10,000 and you sell 10 of them to who, I don't know, because you have no audience, but you're not making six figures in 30 days or even 90 days because you don't even have an audience to sell to.
Yeah.
Like those ads make me so mad.
I know, me too.
Yeah.
And it's okay that you're not making six figures in 90 days.
100%.
The majority of people are not making six figures in 90 days.
Let's be real. Yeah. Yes,
so
absolutely.
It takes what time it takes. And that's what it is. So why we talked a little bit about why making six figures is hard for people, especially that mindset shift. Did you experience that in your six figures? Like, tell us about your experience making your first six figures.
So when I hit that, I was doing everything myself still. So I was confirming all of my clinical appointments. I was doing all the invoicing and whatnot. And it was actually my dad who sat me down and said, look, like if you want to grow this and you want to, expand into different locations and whatnot, like you're gonna have to hire somebody. And so he was actually the one that was like, you made $100,000. And I didn't even know that I did because I was just busy, confirming and taking invoices. I wasn't looking at like the tally of amount that I had made because also in 2009, 2010, people weren't talking like that. Like it wasn't, it wasn't like that. And so what that helped, it helped me to reframe that I was running a business. It helped me to reframe going from a service provider, like I was a nutritionist. My identity was I am a nutritionist, not I have a business. Like when people said to me, you have a business, I'd be like, I have a clinical practice. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't identify as a business owner. I didn't realize that I was a CEO. I was a nutritionist and I had a lot of clients and I felt like a hot mess. That's what I knew. Right? Like that's all it felt like. I was a nutritionist. I had a lot of clients and it was a hot mess. And so he really showed me how to take some of the money that I was making and reinvest it back. And I think that was the biggest shift for me was that I went from a hot mess, although most days I still feel like that, to be honest. I went from being a hot mess and just living in chaos, I think, to really sitting down and putting some systems and structure in place because it felt like the responsible thing to do. Like, oh, I made $100,000. Like that's not a small amount. Or I should say the business, the nutrition practice, because I still had to pay percentages to the rental space and I had to pay my fees and taxes and all of that. So it wasn't like my money, which is why we're saying you're still kind of broke. But it felt legitimate. It felt legitimate. It added a level of legitimacy that I had never felt before. And that helped me to reframe my behavior. I was like, oh, I should do things a little differently now.
Yeah.
Right.
Started taking yourself a little bit more seriously.
A little bit. Yeah.
And take your business more seriously.
Yes. And call it a business.
Yeah.
Like, and actually call it a business.
Start.
Right. Like to me, it was a clinical practice, which is not the same thing as a business.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It felt legitimate. It legitimized me. Like there was a level of pride. There was a level of professionalism. Like, oh, I could actually mismanage money now. Like there was something to mismanage, like there was something that the government could like call me about.
Yeah.
And it just felt like I needed to learn more about finances. I needed to learn more about managing the money side of things because it was a level of like legitimacy that I had never really felt before.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I'm trying to think. I also feel like there was a point that I realized that I was an entrepreneur or that I was a business owner because for so long I was just a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, even when I became a coach, I didn't become a coach with the intention of having a business. I didn't become a coach with the intention of being a business owner. Like I just wanted to
Mm-hmm.
coach people and I wanted people to pay me for it, which sounds
Yeah.
so ridiculous now. But at the time I was just like, okay, I'm a coach. Like
Yeah.
I didn't know I had to do marketing and sales and run a business. Like that wasn't what I
Yes.
signed up for. I just
Yeah.
wanted to be a coach.
Well, I feel like I feel like that a lot of people come into the coaching industry with that level of like naivete
Mm-hmm.
of like, well, I'm this profession now. Like I've graduated and now I can, there's a piece of paper that tells me that I can work with clients,
Yeah. So
but
what's my thing?
right. And it was never really explained how to do that.
Yeah.
One of the questions that I often ask very smart, very well educated professionals, they've gone to school, they have degrees, some of them have masters, some of them have PhDs in their respective health fields. I'm like, do you even know what an online business is? Like, if you had to break it down for me, the mechanics of it, could you do that? And they're like, no,
Mm-hmm.
I post on Facebook. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, that's not it.
That
No,
makes it
that's
online.
that's not a business. No, that's social media. So it's very interesting. And I think for the first time over the last couple of years, especially since 2020, and we all know what I'm referring to, things changed. And I think a lot more people are using social media and are using the internet. And, and I think the idea of making $100,000, you know, is now it's almost like mainstream in
Mm-hmm.
the online space, whereas before it was real estate agents and people who were like in finance and they talked about money, but for anyone with an internet connection, it's quite possible, you know
Mm-hmm.
through Etsy, through all of these things. It's so interesting, but I still think there's a level of before the first six figures and then after the first six figures.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
So, what advice do you have for someone who's listening to this podcast that is still working towards their first six
Mm.
figures? Because we've talked about how freaking hard it is
Yes.
and how many times you're like, okay, how about I just go get a job?
Mm.
So, what advice do you have for people who are in that space?
Um, just keep going. The level of outside of your comfort zone, the level of discomfort, the hot mess that you are, maybe feeling like you're operating in, the level of self-doubt, it doesn't really ever entirely go away because we're all human, but it does minimize.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. And that fear of, is this going to work? That fear of, can I do this again? Is that fear of, will anyone pay me? It goes away because your skill set strengthens. And
Mm-hmm.
so just know that if you're starting from scratch in any industry and you're wondering if you're going to be able to do it, you can. It's just that you need time to strengthen your skill set. And the more you do it, the stronger your skill set becomes, the better at it you become, the easier it gets, but it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time and it takes many repetitions. Think outside to anything else. If you were learning a language, if you were learning a new sport, if you were learning a new card game, you wouldn't just try it one, two, three, or even 10 times and go, well, I'm not an expert. So I'm not, a gold medalist. So I might as well quit.
Mm-hmm.
Think of how much skill training, preparation, repetition, right, goes into becoming a better athlete, becoming a better poker player, becoming a better knitter, right? Becoming a better person that speaks multi languages.
Mm-hmm.
It's just repetition. And so you just haven't had enough time, right? You haven't had enough repetition yet to allow it to feel easier. It will never feel entirely easy, because if it did, everybody would do it. And so just know that if you are someone who's like, no, I have grit and I have stamina and I am resilient, if you identify those traits as having those traits, then it's just repetition. You just need to keep doing it and tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it, and you'll get better, and then you'll hit it.
Yeah. So good. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
If anybody wants to connect with you, I know you're very active on Instagram. Is that the best way for them to learn more about you, or where should we send them?
Yep. You can go to Instagram. So it's at Lori Kennedy Inc. And Lori spelled Lori, Kennedy like the president, INC. Although no relation to the president. I'm Canadian. And yeah, come and hang out on Instagram. Let me know where you're at in your journey to six figures. When you hit it, send me a DM. I will celebrate with you. Also, I know that sometimes it's hard to celebrate money wins with people who don't understand. So feel free, send me a DM. I will celebrate with you.
Awesome. I love it. I will put the link for your Instagram in the show notes so that everyone can connect with you. And thank you again for coming and talking to me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Your Relationship With podcast. If you love what you hear, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I've got some really cool interviews coming up. Also, please leave a review. You know I love it, and it helps other women just like you find the podcast. Also, definitely click the link in the show notes and check out the Powerful Women Rising community. I want to meet you. I want to talk to you. I want to network with you and introduce you to all of the amazing women in this community who I know will help you grow your business in a way that is faster, simpler, and way more fun than what you've been doing. So definitely check it out and come back next week.